Okay, so I want to give a little bit of what I think is a Torah perspective um, on the events of October 7th. You know, people are complaining about the fact that it's Simchas Torah. It wasn't October 7th. For us, it's Simchas Torah. But the truth is that on Simchas Torah, these thoughts and some of these these memorials and things that we're going through are not won't be appropriate, because on Simchas Torah, as maybe I'll talk about it a little bit later again, but on Simchas Torah, the real appropriate reaction is to dance with our hearts to, 1,000 times what we would normally dance, is to show that the spirit of the Jewish people can't be snuffed out, and that the connection to Torah can't be snuffed out. And that's why this year's Simchas Torah and every subsequent year's Simchas Torah is not a downer day, but Simchas Torah will forever be marked as the day that we have an opportunity to declare our connection to the Rebbeinu Shalom. And I think that'll become the clearest when I finish what I have to say tonight. So let's talk about what the purpose of remembering is. There's what is the purpose of all the, I don't know, I'm sure that you've been inundated on YouTube and online. You've been inundated with and there are some very, very beautiful videos that have been made, and very poignant videos that have been made. But what's the purpose of remembering? Because the truth is that, and I can say this for here in Israel, that since October 7th, no one has forgotten. Everywhere you turn, no matter where you are, no matter what you're at, whether it's at a bris. I was at a bris today, and for a moment there was there was the usual talk of the prayers for the release of the hostages, the prayers for the end of the war, the prayers for the soldiers, that the soldiers should come home safely and peacefully. We were at a wedding just a few weeks ago, and instead, besides just doing the regular breaking of the glass and the reminder of the destruction of the temple, we offered a prayer for the soldiers. It's everywhere you turn. You see soldiers. Every family, every person is connected to somebody who's connected to somebody who's in the army. Yesterday I was at a family bris, and one of my nephews was there, and he's 39, maybe he turned 40 already. He's got 3 kids. He was in 6 months already in Gaza. He came home and he's going right back. And right after the holidays, he's going back. It's everywhere you turn. It's not. These are the realities we live with. I was traveling this summer. Every time you go into the airport, as you're walking into Israel and you're walking out of Israel, I don't know how many of you have been here in the past year, but you see on the sides, on that walkway, when you go into the airport, you come down the walkway. When you come out, you go down, you go up the walkway. So you on the sides is all the thing, if you travel a lot. So the thing that's heartbreaking is that it gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and there are less posters and less posters and less posters. And it is a painful reminder. Everywhere you turn, you see the ribbons, the yellow ribbon of the reminder of the hostages. It's everywhere. There's no way to forget. No way to forget the pain when you go down to Sderot, when you go down to Barry, when you go down to where the Nova Festival was. It's there. It's all around you. And every time a soldier dies, which unfortunately seems like it's almost every single day, that every time a soldier dies, it brings the whole thing right back. And you're not in the past anymore. You're not a year ago. You're today. And a year ago is today. And we live through this. And you look at those faces of the soldiers, those beautiful faces of young men, of young fathers, of young people. And you look at them and you realize that this is something that is happening all the time, every day. We're living with October 7th. So what is the day? What's the purpose of remembering all of this? What's the purpose of the day of October 7th? And I think that the real difficulty of the day and the real challenge of the day is not to make sure that we never forget, But the real challenge of the day is some of the things that we realize on that day. And some of the things that we realize when we think back are things that are jarring and shocking. One of those things is the realization that it's been a year. It hasn't been just a couple of months. It hasn't been just a little bit of time. It's been a year. And that this seems to be our new reality. Living with a war, living with hostages, living with this kind of pain and this kind of uncertainty seems to be our new reality with no end in sight. We realize that we're living in the new reality of anti-Semitism, of the anti-Semitism that we saw on October 7th, of the sheer hatred for the Jewish people that has been boiling for 3,500 years, and that has come to a head more than once in our history, and has come to a head, or is coming to a head once again, when we realize that we're living in the new reality of an anti-Semitism that is couched in civility, that our ancestors saw in Germany and in Poland and in Lithuania, and that we are seeing now in America, and we are seeing now in Europe, and we are seeing now around the world. And it is a shocking, shocking realization that this is our new reality, which we were living in denial about for years and years and years, thinking that we were living in a Medina Shel Chesed, we were living in a country of kindness, which we were. But that country of kindness has turned. And I'm not condemning, and I'm not a person who's saying that, do a doomsday sayer. But at the end of the day, we have to recognize that we live in the reality of a world. Though we did see yesterday beautiful things around the world of gatherings of Jews and non-Jews supporting Israel, but the world that we're living in is a world that is poised against the Jewish people. The new reality of living with war and with death, with children growing up without fathers, with refugees, with husbands that are away from their families for chunks of time, with parnasa, trauma, PTSD problems, shalom bias problems, self-reflection problems, all kinds of issues that we have not had to deal with in such an acute kind of way. My nephew was telling me about his children that, and this is everybody's children are going through the traumas of seeing their fathers walk out the door and not knowing if their fathers are coming back. The trauma of wives having to live with that fear and then at the same time juggle their family and to feel the certain sense of resentment, even though they're proud, even though they feel my husband is protecting this country, but at the end of the day, he's not here with his family. These are issues and these are problems that we're dealing with all over the country, all over our Jewish world. We come to the realization on October 7th that the new reality that we live in is that we are really alone. When the Mishnah warns us to be careful of leadership, of political leadership, because they use us only when they need us, and then they spit us out, is what we are watching. We are watching political leadership that embraces us with one hand, pushes us away with another. We have no idea where they really stand, where the statements that come out are so contradictory, where on the one hand they say that we need to make an arms embargo, and on the other hand they say, we're behind you. You have the rights to do whatever you want. Well, which is it? Mm-hmm. Where do I stand in your world? And we have no idea. I think that's the shock and the trauma of October 7th, that it's been a year and this is our reality. So what do? So as Jews, we search, we try to find meaning, try to find a little understanding of what's going on and what all this means to us. And when we try to do that, we slip into certain places. For many, we ask the question, where was God on October 7th? How could such a thing have happened? And there's a danger to the question. Because very often we come up with the answer because. And we say that it was because of what was going on at the Nova Festival. It was because of desecration of Simchas Torah. It was because of a myriad of sins and transgressions of the Jewish people. And that's a very dangerous place to be in. Even though, if you look in your Musaf davening on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and holidays, we say the words Mipnei Chatoenu Golinu Me'artzenu. It's in our davening. Because of our sins, we have been exiled from our land. But we can have a clarity after 2,000 years, and we can look backwards and we can identify exactly what sins caused us to be kicked out of the land. But that's because we have the benefit of 2,000 years. But 75 years, 1 year, there's no clarity. We can't say what that sin was, because most of the time, it's somebody else's sin, not mine. Most of the time, it's what other people were doing. It's not what I'm doing and who I am. And when you have the passage of time, you have the advantage of looking back and saying, I was guilty of that also. And it was perhaps things that were much bigger, much more general, that affected all of us. And it wasn't just what one segment of our population, what one segment of our people were doing. Then there are those that slip into the place that say that it happened for the sake of, that the Holocaust was be able to be able to have for the sake of having the state of Israel. That the things that were taking place that the October 7th was there to bring peace and to bring togetherness of the Jewish people. Because if you can remember back to last Yom Kippur, can you remember back to last Yom Kippur? Remember what was happening in Tel Aviv last Yom Kippur, in the streets of Tel Aviv, the incredible Chilul Hashem that was taking place, when there were people that were trying to daven in one of the squares in Tel Aviv, and there was sidurim being thrown in the garbage, and there was desecration that was taking place. The hatred, the level of hatred that was boiling in the country was incredible. And then maybe October 7th was to bring peace back. And it's a noble thought, but how do we know? And really, our only reaction is the reaction of Aaron. When the craziest thing happened in his life, on the day of the inauguration of the temple, his two sons, who were tzaddikim, who were good boys, they weren't drunks, they weren't wild people, they weren't off the derech. They made a spiritual mistake, but they were seen as bikidoshai. They were seen by sanctified ones. Those are the ones that sanctify God's name. They walked into the Holy of Holies, and they did the sacrificial system wrong, and they died on that day. On the day that we Jews were waiting for that atonement for the sin of the golden calf, we were waiting for God to reapprove of us, to bring us back to Him, to say, I have forgiven you like you have asked. And on that day, our two beautiful children, the children of Klal Yisrael, they died. They were killed. And what was Aaron's reaction? The Torah tells us, Vayidom Aaron. Aaron was silent. Moshe Rabbeinu sees, when God brings him up to the heavens, what's going to happen in the future. And he sees Rabbi Akiva. And there's a whole incident of seeing Rabbi Akiva teach Torah. Moshe Rabbeinu becomes despondent. He doesn't understand any of Rabbi Akiva's Torah. But then he hears Rabbi Akiva's students ask him, Rabbi, where do you know that from? And Rabbi Akiva said, I know it from the Torah of Moshe. Oh, that Moshe Rabbeinu was able to understand. And he felt better. He knew that everything ultimately came from the Torah. It wasn't some new thing. But then Moshe Rabbeinu was privy to see the end of Rabbi Akiva. And he saw Rabbi Akiva's skin being combed off. And he turned to God and he said to God, Zu Torah v'zu schara. V'zu schara, this is Torah and this is its reward. This is what happens when you dedicate your life to teaching Torah, even when you know that you're going to be put to death. And this is the reward for teaching Torah, to die in this kind of way. And the angels had the same problem. And God says, be quiet. Be quiet doesn't mean don't ask the question. Be quiet means now is not the time for the answer. Yes, life is confusing. Yes, there are things in our lives that we can't explain. There are events that happen that are unexplainable. But the reason they're unexplainable is because we are human beings. The world is not being run by humans. What is happening in front of us is not being run by humans. We think it's being run by humans, and therefore we go crazy about who we're going to vote in, who's going to be the next president of the United States. We waste so much flipping time on worrying about who's going to be the president. Stop worrying. Because at the end of the day, who's ever going to be president, either it's going to mean that God's going to have an easier time or a harder time to work through that person. But that's all that person is doing. They're only doing what God wants to be done. At the end of the day, Vayidaim Aaron, be quiet, take it in, listen, hear the sound of God, hear the fact that God is running all of this. And when you recognize that, so then that's when things will start to be okay. That's the way we deal with trauma. That's the way we deal with difficulty. Vayidaim Aaron. You can't always give an answer. You can't always give an explanation. Not because, not for the sake. We can't give always. We can't intellectualize and give logic to the things that are happening. The more we realize that we aren't running the world, and that ultimately God is running the world, we will have the strength to do what a Jew has done since the beginning of time, and that is turn to God and to recognize that we need to turn to Him in prayer. We need to turn to Him with our mitzvos, our connection, our relationship. And the more we rely on Him, then the more He will bring that salvation, that geula, that redemption to us. So people ask, that's all fine and good that we have to pray to God. And Roland, you were privy to this. We were having a conversation with a bunch of people recently, and it was just fascinating conversation of how people reacted to this notion that ultimately we have to turn to God. And ultimately it's about our mitzvos, and it's about our Torah, and it's about our davening, it's about our praying. And the question, of course, is always comes up, what about our military? Don't we have to focus on that? Don't we have to focus on our strength? Don't we have to focus on the things that we do, on our actions, not just on prayer? So I'll tell you an amazing thing. You know what the Talmud calls farmers? Calls them Baalei Emunah, people of incredible faith. Why is a farmer a person of incredible faith? A farmer goes out, he tills the land, he puts the seeds in the ground, and then he sits there and he's successful. He grows a crop. Why is he called faith? Because when he puts that seed in the ground, he has no idea whether that seed is going to be successful or not. But he does it anyway. But at the end of the day, when he puts that seed in the ground, he knows who he's relying on. He's relying on the master of the universe. We need those seeds. You're not going to get fruit without seeds. But then when you put the seeds in the ground, there's no guarantee that you're getting fruits. We need the guns and we need the soldiers, but there's no guarantee they're going to be successful. There's no guarantee that when they shoot that Iron Dome and those anti-missiles, that they're going to be successful. And we've seen when they're not successful. And what makes a difference of whether they're successful or not? The Rebbeinu Shalom. And what's his measure? That today it's going to work, tomorrow it's not? I have no idea. Imagine some poor guy. Now, I don't know whether this guy was a Palestinian, whether he was a terrorist or wasn't a terrorist, but some poor guy walks out of his house
in Jericho,
and some bomb falls on the guy's head. And the guy's gone. He walked outside for who knows what. And the guy's not there anymore. And who made that decision? That guy. 10 other guys walked out of their houses, nothing happened to them. People are walking out of their houses every day, nothing happens to them. Who makes that decision? The Rebbeinu Shalom makes that decision. At the end of the day, we have to do what we do, but at the end of the day, we have to recognize that ultimately, all of this is being run by God. October 7th has to remind us that at the end of the day, this is part of the plan of the Rebbeinu Shalom. What is that plan? What's the end? Who knows? Vayidom Aaron. Be quiet and listen. Just hear God talking to his people. And he could be saying 1,000 different messages. But just listen. You know, there's an incredible thing. There's machlokas, a difference of opinion between the Rambam and the Ramban as to whether there is a daily obligation to pray. And I know that that might be shocking to you because prayer is such a basic thing to us. You can't imagine that there's anybody in the world that would hold any opinion in Torah that is orthodox, that would hold that there is maybe not a daily obligation to pray. Says the Ramban, if you look carefully at the Torah says that we have to daven at an Eis Ratzon at a time that is a dangerous time, a time that is a time of divine will, and that we need God, and therefore we pray to him. But not necessarily a daily obligation to pray to him. Says Nachmanides, we have an obligation, says Maimonides, we have an obligation every day to pray to God. So I once saw a great rabbi that said that maybe there is no difference of opinion between Maimonides and Nachmanides. Because it could very well be that everybody agrees that really, as far as the Torah is concerned, you only have to pray in what's called an Eis Ratzon, in a difficult time, in a time where you need God's beneficence, when you need God to look out after you, that's when you have an obligation to pray. But says Maimonides, that's every single day. Every single day is an Eis Ratzon. We're living through a time like that. Can you imagine what our davening would be like if we felt that every single day was a day where we needed God? You know, we talk this game, but we don't necessarily feel this game. We say the words that we know. Look, I know everything comes from God. It's all coming from God. But at the end of the day, we put so much energy into our hishtadlus, so much energy into the things that we do that it masks and sometimes causes us to forget that really at the end of the day, ein lanu al mi lihisha, we have nothing to rely on, rather avinu shebashamayim, except for our Father in heaven. I've said this over many, many times, and I, in Yirtzeh Hashem, will have the opportunity to say it over many other times in my lifetime. There was a woman by the name of Chana who we spoke about on Rosh Hashanah, in one of the Haftorahs of Rosh Hashanah. Chana was the mother of Shmuel, of Samuel the prophet. Chana was barren. She had no children. Her husband Elkanah had two wives, Pnina and Chana. Pnina was blessed with many, many children. Pnina would taunt Chana that she had no children. She would take care of her children in front of her. She would knit things in front of her. She would make her feel bad. Our rabbis say that as wicked as that seems, she was doing that to try to press Chana to daven harder. Year after year after year, Chana davened, no children. The Navi says that one day her husband turns to her Elkanah, and he says to her, "Why are you so sad?" Says, "I'm going to be to you like 10 children. I'm going to take care of you like 10 children would take care of you. I love you. I'll protect you. Don't worry. I understand the disappointment of not having children. But you know what? We don't have children. But that doesn't mean my connection to you is any weaker." Now, when women hear that, they all say, "How romantic. What a beautiful thing for a husband to say to his wife." But you know what Chana's reaction was? It broke her. And she went down to the temple and she davened in a way that she had never davened before. To the extent that Eli HaKohen, Eli the high priest, saw her davening and he thought that she was drunk, that there was something wrong with her. And those prayers were answered. And she had a child. And our rabbis ask, what happened? What happened? She's been davening for years and years and years. And then suddenly her husband gives her a Valentine's Day card and he says to her, "Honey, I love you and I'll take care of you and don't worry." And that breaks her. Because up until then, though she was praying with all of her might and soul, she knew there was somebody else praying for her also. Somebody else that was sharing her burden. And when her husband said to her, "We don't have children," and gave her the impression that he had given up, now she knew there was only one person praying for her, and there was only one person that she was praying to, and that was God. And that she had no place else to turn. It was her and God. And that prayer was so powerful that prayer was listened to and God responded to that. They tell over a beautiful story of a fellow that once came to a Rebbe in the time of the Tsar. And he comes to the Rebbe and he says to the Rebbe, "My son is being conscripted into the Tsar's army." What they would do is they would come to a town and they would take children and bring them at 7, 8 years old. And they would take them to the Tsar's army. They would stay in the army for 20 years. By the time they came out, they were no longer religious. They were no longer connected to their Judaism. They were only 7 or 8 when they went in. And it was a big tragedy and a great worry in every Jewish town. Guy comes into the Rebbe and says, "Rebbe, I need you to daven for me. I need you to pray on behalf of my child. My child is being conscripted into the army. And I'm worried that he's going to be taken into the army. Pray for him. Pray that he shouldn't be taken. Pray that he shouldn't be one of the ones that the army takes away." And the Rebbe looks at him and says, "Can you repeat that, please?" And the guy says, "Rebbe, I'm here to ask you to please pray for my son. He's going to be conscripted into the army, and I don't want him to go into the army, and I want him to be saved. Can you pray for him, please?" And the Rebbe looks at him and says, "Can you repeat that, please?" And the guy says, "Rebbe, I'm here to pray." 10 times. After the 10th time, the Rebbe looks at the fellow and says, "Get out of my office, you ingrate. We live in a country. We have an obligation to support that country. If it means losing our children, then we lose our children. We have an obligation to be part of this and to be nationalistic and to be part of this unbelievable, amazing country. Get out of here." He throws him out of his office. When the Chassidim hear this, they go crazy. They say, "What's going on? Our Rebbe's lost his mind." A few weeks later, government officials come to the Rebbe and they give him a medal. They award him with the nationalistic patriotic award because that person that came into his office to ask him to pray was in fact an informant, somebody hired by the government to get the Rebbe to say anti-government things. And because he didn't, so then he was not only saved, but he was awarded. When the Chassidim heard this, they said, wow, our Rebbe is a magician. How did he figure out that this guy was an informant? That's amazing. So they called the Rebbe the word Baal Meifis. He was a person who could do tricks. He could do magic. He was a Baal Meifis. So the Rebbe said, not a Baal Meifis. He said, when that guy came in to ask for his son to be saved, he was like deadpan. So I asked him to repeat it. And it was exactly the same emotion. And I asked him to repeat it again, and it was exactly the same emotion. If that guy was really praying for his son, then he would be completely broken. By the 10th time I asked him to say it over, he would have been howling on the floor, Rebbe, listen to me, listen to me. And because he was of the same composure every time, I knew that this wasn't real. Because when we can pray for the hostages, when we can pray for the soldiers and not shed a tear every single day and not feel a sense of that each day is the sword is on our neck. Each day we're in an Eis Ratzon. Each day we're in this incredible pressure cooker of time. So that means we don't really necessarily have that sense that there's no place else to turn but God. And it's only those kinds of prayers that will be effective. Chizkiyahu, the king, the great, wonderful king Hezekiah, didn't get married because he had a prophecy that his child was going to turn to idolatry. The prophet comes to see him, Isaiah, and tells him that he's going to die because God was upset with him that he had not gotten married and had children. And he said to Isaiah, is there a way to fix this? And Isaiah said, no. And the pasuk says that he turned Panav el Akir, he turned his face to the wall. And he davened. From that section of the Talmud, we learn a lot of the laws of davening, that it's good to daven in front of a wall, so on and so forth, the way that he davened. But there are some of our rabbis that explain, what does it mean that he turned his face to the wall? That he knew there was a decree. He knew that God said, no, you're not going to live. And he said, I can't accept that. And he davened, and he broke through that wall. And he actually did get married, and he did have a son, and his son was an idolater. But he wouldn't accept status quo. Rachel, Imenu, wouldn't accept status quo. And that's why prayers are answered. When we push through the wall, when we daven as if there is no tomorrow, there is no choice, there is no place else to turn. When we say the words to God, God, may you one day rule over the entire world. We said it so many times on Rosh Hashanah. We're going to say it again so many times on Yom Kippur. The whole essence of the Shemona Esrei on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur is about God. You should rule over the entire world. Let the world see you and recognize you already. And when we say that as words, they're meaningless. And when we say that with a feeling, with a sense that, you know what, this is what we need. This is what my whole life needs. My whole existence needs. When we say to God to heal the sick, and we say the words, we think for a second, and then we move on. That's not praying with a sense that there's no place else to turn but God. And there's nobody else that could do this to me but God. That power, that strength, that realization that ein lanu al mi lehisho'ein elo al avinu shebashamayim, we have no place else to turn and nothing else to rely on. No country, no person, no army, the success of every single one of those things is in the hands of God. And therefore, it's not to the army that I pray. It's not to the politicians that I pray. It's not to the other countries that I pray. It is to God himself, with the sense that the only way that there is going to be a geula, the only way there's going to be a redemption, the only way that this reality of the past year is going to change is going to be if God dictates that it changes. Why he brought this about? Vayidom Aaron, be silent. It doesn't matter. But that this is our reality. This is our reality, and that reality lies in the hands of God. And when our davening changes, and when our observance changes, when our mitzvos change, when our relationship with God changes, that's when our reality changes. We can say we want peace from today till tomorrow. But unless we feel that the way that peace is going to be achieved is going to be through the master of the universe, and we pray as if there is nothing else but us praying and God listening, unless we pour every ounce of our strength into the hope and the prayers for the hostages, in the hope and the prayers of the success of our soldiers, of the return of our soldiers, of the bringing of peace to our world, unless we realize that it's not 10 things that are going to bring it, it's only one, and we pour all of our energy into that, that's when we're going to see a geula, that's when we're going to see a redemption. And those are the thoughts that need to be in our mind on October 7th. That's the strength that we need to take from the day. Ein lanu al mi lihi sho'ein. There's nobody else to rely on, to rest on, to lean on. Ella al Avinu shebashamayim. But only on our Father in heaven. And we pray on this day that our tefillah should be heard, our prayers should be answered, but more importantly, that our tefillah should be real tefillahs, that our prayers should be real prayers, and that they should be propelled to the heavens with power, the power of our faith and the power of our belief, because when they're propelled with power, they're heard with love and mercy. And may we see that love and mercy being showered on our people with the return of the hostages, with the return of peace, and ultimately the return of the entire Jewish people back into the loving embrace of our Father in heaven, in Yerushalayim Habenuya, b'mehera v'yameinu, amen.